And we're starting.
There we go.
He's going to show up, I think. Can you hear us, Mayor Pro Tem? Hello?
Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, Villa Park.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Good evening. Tonight is the first of two budget study sessions. Today is May 7th, 2019, 6 p.m. And Steve, please call the roll.
Okay, I have Councilman Colacott,
Here.
Councilwoman Miles,
Here.
Councilman Zimmerman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pitts is joining us via teleconference, and we can go into details, but it's posted and he's up north, but he's visible on the screen. And Mayor Rossini,
Here.
all present in one form or another.
Okay. Currently, we have no members of the public in attendance. I appreciate everybody that is tuning in, and certainly city staff for being here, and all council members, including Mayor Pro Tem Pitts. Good evening and welcome, sir, and thank you for making time out of your schedule for us. Let's all please rise. I'm going to go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if that's okay. I want to reserve the next one for you at the next city council meeting. Okay. Please turn and face the flag. Place your right hand over your heart and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands,
For which it
one
stands,
nation, under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty
indivisible,
and justice for
liberty
all.
and justice
Thank
for
you.
all.
Please be seated. Public comment. There are no members of the public present, so we'll go ahead and move beyond that. And budget study session. Frank, you're on.
We're kind of going to tag team this, so
Great.
what we want to do, we have a PowerPoint. Do you want to catch the first light so you can see it clearly on the screen? Wrong one, wrong first one. There we go. Your other left. So we've got a PowerPoint presentation which will show, council members all have a copy, and Mayor Pro Tem has a copy as well, and you can see what's being presented. This is the first, like you said, of two budget workshops. The second will be in first week of June, first Tuesday. What the intent here is today is to basically walk through the initial part of the budget.
Can I make I'm so sorry. Maybe we could actually turn that, they're going to see this broadcast to them. That doesn't need to be lit up, and we can all see them with the handouts right in front of us.
Okay,
Would you rather have
Instead of us turning around, why don't we
perfect. All right,
just turn the light back on and read?
all right. Okay, you want to flip the next?
Yeah.
Okay, the intent of tonight is the first of two. This is the sort of introduction or sort of the first delve into the budget for fiscal year 1920. As you recall, our budget year starts July 1st and ends in June 30th. So we are just about the end of fiscal year 1819 and just about to start 1920. So with that, tonight we want to give you our first sort of high level of analysis of projections. We're going to talk about some of our assumptions that we'll be building into our budget, and get some feedback from the council. Again, it's at a high level, and then we'll get some discussion, hopefully, or input from the council if they feel there's something appropriate they want us to add or change, or add something to the list of. You'll see there's a pretty comprehensive list of extra items we have. So the purpose tonight is not to go through line items. The purpose is at a high level policy to try and get and help us get a sense of where the council is what they're considering for priorities, and to provide us input. There'll be ample opportunity to meet with us at any given time, obviously between the meetings, but tonight is more just a matter of collectively all of you having a chance. The next meeting, the intent would be to pull the direction we get tonight and sort of refine our projections and be able to come back with you with our first cut at what a budget would look like with our recommendations to balance it. And at that point in June, first part of June, the council would have an opportunity to say, yes, no, we want to tweak this or tweak that. So the formal adoption of the budget will be at the June 28th, I believe. So this is the first of three actual views of the budget. So Frank's going to start it off and sort of talk about where we are with projections. I'll go into the assumptions, and then it'll be discussion, direction of staff will be sort of up to the council. So Frank, I'll let you on page 3 of the presentation.
So what I did is, looked at the activity, financial activity, revenue and expenditures up through the end of March, and tried to make some projections as to where we'll be at the end of June. And this is, again, just, we have multiple funds at the city. We have a general fund and other funds, which are really special revenue funds. We get certain revenue, and that revenue has to be used for certain purposes. But the bulk of the presentation today is really just on the general fund. So what I'll do is go through the projections, and then first,
And for clarification, because we have two, the general fund is truly your discretionary fund. The council has discretion to use those monies in whatever way they want to use them on anything that the city might get involved with. What the special revenue funds, what he's talking about is if we get certain monies that might be, for instance, gas tax monies or something that are dedicated for street repair or something like that, they have to be used for street repair. And if we don't spend them, we have to hold them in account to be used in the future for that purpose. Whereas general fund, you can use for whatever you might want to. You can put it in reserve if you don't want to. You can designate it for projects. You can use it for anything special you may feel appropriate. So I apologize for interrupting, but I know we have two new council members. I wanted to make sure they get sort of an understanding of where we're at.
and I have to remember that I can't assume things, so just, let me know if you have any questions. So with regards to general fund revenue, what I've looked at is with regards to a projection for this year, really not a whole lot with regards to being higher than what was budgeted, but it's better than being lower. Our property tax, some of our interest, permits, plan checks, that type of activity, public safety sales tax is a little bit higher than what was budgeted. Overall, about 5,000 higher than budget. We do have some line items that are lower. Local sales tax, the local sales tax and the public safety sales tax, we get projections from our consultant Avenue. They're basically sales tax consultants. They project with regards to local sales tax, that being a little bit lower next year, or for this year, as well as next year. But the public safety sales tax being a little bit higher. Also looking at the property transfer tax being a little bit lower than budget for this year. The property transfer tax is whenever there's any real estate activity, any transfers of property, there's a fee paid through the recorder's office. And so the recorder's office allocates that out to the cities. And that's running a little bit lower than what was budgeted. So those are some of the items that, with regards to revenue. In regards to expenditures.
Before we leave revenue, could you and or the city manager comment on the amount of revenue this city of Villa Park receives per household relative to other cities in Orange County?
Yeah, we could do that. As far as the breakup, I'll give you a breakup, and then the actual dollar amounts I'll have to follow up with because I don't have them with me tonight. But the breakup is very unique for Villa Park. In other words, we're one of the few cities that relies primarily on property tax, almost exclusively on property tax, if you will. We only get a couple $100,000 out of a $3.5 million or $4.5 million budget comes from sales tax. Most of it comes from property tax. So most cities rely strongly on sales tax. That would be sales tax retail, that would be car sales tax, those types of things. Villa Park does not get very much at all. Our substantial revenues for the general fund come from the property tax that people pay on their properties. So those are pretty much limited unless they're 2% growth with Prop 13, unless there are improvements made on those properties. So you'll see a lot of construction going on in Villa Park and upgrades. When that happens, properties are reappraised, property tax goes up. So you'll wonder, why does our property tax go up more than 2%? It's because properties get reappraised. It may not have been, it may have been appraised in 20 years ago, and then when it's remodeled and something's done, then property tax is going to go up. So Per capita, our property tax is much higher than other cities. Sales tax, our per capita is much lower. That's a good point that you're making, Councilman. I don't have the exact numbers, but I certainly will follow up and get you the actual numbers with that. But as a general rule, we have no malls. We have one retail center. We don't have any car dealerships. And so we're going to get a very limited amount. We have obviously the town center, and that's the only place we're going to get our sales tax. So that's exclusively it.
Yeah, and I understand that Villa Park cities receive roughly 11% of every dollar paid in property tax. So it's, even though we have high assessed valuations, although, whatever property tax I pay to the county, the city gets back maybe 11% of that.
Yeah, if you go back to Prop 13 was adopted in 1978, and what they did at that time, prior to Prop 13, local property taxes were adjusted on a yearly basis. So the way you built your budget, and having lived in that era, they would build their budget, knew what they'd into expenditures, and then they would adjust their property taxes. Prop 13 stopped that and said you had 2% growth on a base year, and that base year was 1978. So every year then, your growth could only be 2%. So what that did, when it said 2%, it froze the allocation. So if you had your percentages, at that time, we had a very low percentage going back to the county, for instance. So the county gets, I want to say, 6% on the dollar. If you were comparing us to, say, San Francisco at the time was getting 23% on the dollar. So those formulas got locked into place. So that's what the inequity that you hear, property tax inequity. Our property taxes go out so that every dollar we pay, like you're saying, we're probably paying 90% of that leaves the city and never comes back. Whereas if you were in San Francisco, you're going to get only 80% of that goes away and never comes back. And what is that fund when it said never comes back? That goes to state-funded programs, schools, and those types of things. But the property tax in Villa Park, the formula is driven here, locked in from Prop 13. So that's sort of a background story of why we're sitting where we are. We are we have historically had high property values, so that's sort of affected and kept us financially stable.
Yeah. I guess one of the points I wanted to make is that if we just look at our next door neighbors, Anaheim Orange, they have large sources of sales tax and bed tax revenues.
Right.
For example, Anaheim has a lot of hotels, so the bed taxes
Yes.
that they get paid helps fund them at a much higher level than we have. So they have additional resources that they can use to support other amenities for their residents that we don't have. So we're a little more challenged to try to live within our budget since
Right.
we're relying entirely on property tax.
So you make a good point. Because we have such a small sales tax base, unlike you'll see a lot of cities in Orange County and up and down the state are adopting their own special sales tax. Well, in Villa Park, if you were to adopt a half-cent sales tax, it would mean pennies on the dollar that we would get and not worth the aggravation. It would be very, very little. When we only receive $200,000 to $300,000 in sales tax in total for the year, much other cities receive hundreds of millions of dollars actually from sales tax. So it would never make sense for Villa Park to adopt a sales tax. The administrative costs behind trying to collect it would probably minimize any sort of return you would get on something. So I think you're absolutely right. The flexibility that this council has is very limited in comparison to other councils. That's a really good point that you make, Councilman.
So since we've been incorporated in 1962, we've been very conservative with our expenditures, realizing that we have a very finite, although very, very constant revenue source, but it's still, very relatively limited relative to other cities that have other large sources of revenue like car dealerships and malls and so forth. So.
And that's one of the issues when you get into a recession and if there is a housing slump, for instance, and that would affect Villa Park potentially, maybe more so than some of the other cities. But Villa Park has been extremely conservative over the years, and the council has lived within their means and established a very well-funded reserve along the way. So they position themselves in a very good position. Your predecessors, and I have every reason to believe this council will do the same, to keep us in a good financial position. So from the layman's term, we are consistently under budget in expenditures, and we over realize our revenues. And I think that's another case here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so moving along to expenditures, looking at this point, overall being 660,000 under budget. There are, multiple reasons for that, which I'll get into. There are some items which we are a little bit over salaries and benefits with regards to the benefit side, retirement costs. We are a little bit over budget, but in reality, it's really that I under budgeted with regards to retirement. There are a couple of items related to retirement costs. There's the employer cost, which is a percentage of payroll, as well as the unfunded actuarial liability that that CalPERS charges every city and special district. And I was a little bit under with regards to that, and so I'll do better to get better information for our upcoming fiscal year. So that shouldn't be an issue. With regards to operating expenses, I'm projecting for us to be about $290,000 under budget. Some items, line items, we've not spent out. We may not spend out what we've budgeted. So, that's something that will need to be trued up again in a couple months.
Which are the more noteworthy operating expenses that we've not spent out or?
We have there's a contingency that's 150,000. That is the contingency that you build in for basically for Frank and myself to deal with. I think we've spent maybe 20,000 of it.
Correct.
20,000 of the 150, so I've been very judicious in spending money. And so if you were to say 290, and that's a lot of, we're pretty conservative in what we buy and why we buy things. So that's a good thing, and that's sort of my philosophy and as extension of the council.
There are a couple of other items. For example, some of our sidewalk repair, we've not spent as much as budgeted. Sewer cleaning, some line items such as that, and those are budgeted at roughly 40,000 each. So those are some of the items that have allowed us to be under budgeted.
And why haven't we spent those? Is it?
Well, I think we've cleaned. We go through a regular cleaning schedule in our sewers, and it just turns out we budgeted, and in the past we've had issues, and because of regular cleaning schedule we've initiated, we haven't had the backflows or things that we have in the past. So by a regular maintenance schedule, we've been able to minimize the expense that we otherwise would have had. So we're continuing to minimize, but we haven't had backflows or overflows. And in the past, you've all gotten phone calls when neighbors have that, but we haven't had very many this year. Because of the maintenance schedule we've been trying to keep aggressively.
The sidewalk repair, is that the handicapped accessibility expenditure?
That is some of the expense there, yes.
Will we be able to get to that before the end of the fiscal year?
We're making an effort. I don't know we're going to spend all the 40,000, but we'll make an effort at some of it. Definitely won't be spending all 40,000.
And it's $40K per item there, sidewalk and sewer?
I don't know if it's.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
Each, yes.
thank you.
The other item with regards to expenditures is in the area of capital projects and equipment expenses, projecting to be a little over 380,000 under budget. One of the main reasons is being the storm drain or Mesa Henderson repair being quite a bit under budget, roughly 290,000. We've utilized per city council authority, moved some of the budget from that project over to the street rehab project, but even with that, we're still under budget.
I guess part of the reason that we're under budget on that is on the Mesa Henderson storm drain is because we've turned this over to our insurance carrier. So are we anticipating in our future budget increased premiums?
We're talking to the insurance company right now, and they have not settled at this point, so we actually don't know where they settled. We met with them just last Monday, So they're still in negotiations. But the issue of premiums will probably not be lump sum. It'll be, over the years when they figure an appreciation schedule. And so we won't see that probably for 3 to 5 years, the real sort of increases, because they true it up and they smooth them, if you will, and it's smoothing in a positive way. They don't just hit you right away, but you're going to pay, an incrementally higher over the course of the years. That's the point of trying to get to an insurance company like that. So that's what they work with us. Page 4.
So with the projections, what we want to do is see where we're at and how much, is available to spend. So what I've done here is shown what, in governmental accounting, we utilize the term fund balance as opposed to out in the public sector retained earnings. So really what's available to spend. So going through this, what I did was I took a look at what was available at the beginning of the year, and that's the $3.5 million. Our projected revenue, also $3.5 million. But with the projected expenditures of almost $4.4 million, and our projected revenue for next year, which we'll get into a little bit, then subtracting what our fund balance has to be used for, meaning what City Council has approved in the past. For example, the general fund cash reserve, which is up to generally a max of 50% of operating expenses, as well as our PARS contribution, or the pension rate stabilization program contribution, as well as some other fund balance reserves for vehicle replacement, for the city TV system, accrued leave, and insurance. So those items are not spendable. So the bottom line is, at this point in time, we're projecting almost $4.4 million available to spend with regards to next year. And that's in comparison to about $3.9 million available to spend same time last year. So just to give you an idea of where we're at from last year to this year. Now the one thing you have to remember, that's there are certain and Steve will go over some of these things, items that as far as what needs to be budgeted, that are caused by external forces. For example, the law enforcement contract. And then there are those items that the council will have discretion over, and that we'll have to discuss as well.
Hey, Frank?
Questions on?
Frank,
Other revenue.
Frank,
So,
can you hear me?
our revenue for next year, and this is where we start to get to making some assumptions, and assumptions are just exactly that, assumptions. They're not, one of the things we do is our property tax,
Steve?
we are estimating based on some preliminary estimates from the assessor.
Well, unfortunately, the assessor's not releasing any type of projection. In the past, he has. Obviously, there's been a change in assessors, but when I inquired for a projection for next year, apparently they're not producing one. So I'm being very conservative in utilizing the 3%. Yes, sir.
Can I go back? Sorry, these numbers are not sitting right with me on the projections. I just want to
Sure.
make sure I'm
Sure.
understanding this real quick. So
It's confusing. You're not
Previous
alone.
Hold on.
page.
Yeah.
previous page. So when you have the fund balance available, that does not include the revenue for the year
Correct.
at the top. But then
Correct.
when you talk about the available, then you throw in 2019 and 20, and you say the available to spend in 2019 at the bottom, that available does include the projected revenue for 19 and 20.
What we're doing is we're taking, the starting balance where we had last year.
Then now, is that an actual balance? When you say
Yes,
available
yes,
balance,
yes.
that's not an available as in including revenues
No,
that's available.
that's what we had available.
But when you say available
That
at the
includes our-
bottom,
that
that
includes-
does include available.
Well, that includes our reserves, and then, so he's getting us to a position where we are going to be available this year.
The top line available is really what we ended up at 17, 18.
Okay,
And I used our financial statements, the CAFR number for that. So that's really a starting point. It's what we have in hand, and then we're going to include what this year we are going to spend and what we're going to receive as revenue.
and that cash reserve, is that
The,
a continual deduction each year, or that's
No,
just-
that is a cash reserve. We have $1.6 million that we have reserved.
Okay, so if we take that 3.5 and we just say 1.6 of that is reserve.
Yes, you're going to get to the same point.
Okay, that's what I was just,
Yeah, it's just the way the government accounting reads, you have to take your balance and then you have to go back, and some of that money is locked up. And it's just
because the other way you look at this, the projected revenue for 2018 and what we expended, it seems like we're spending $800,000 more than we got last year.
well, because we're carrying forward a lot of money that we haven't spent,
Okay, so,
if that makes sense. We're carrying forward unspent money. That is not, so there's a sense, you carry forward two kinds of money. You carry forward money that's obligated for something or designated reserve.
okay,
And then you carry forward money that you had intended to spend, and maybe you didn't get to it, handicap money, for instance. So you have that money to rebudget for the subsequent year.
okay, so it's available, but part of it might have been budgeted, and part of it might be reserves, and there's
Yes, yes.
designations to it, but it's not,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, so that's why we have to kind of go back and, rebudget these things each year. But some of those decisions are discretionary each year. Even though you may budget it, say, for instance, so let's take a handicap, or any project, say we budgeted $40,000. We didn't spend that $40,000 during the year. That money's available to carry forward next year, but you have to budget it for that purpose, otherwise it's just, the money doesn't go away, it's still ours. So when we say fund balance available, that's really carry forward money we have.
And the projected expenditures is just a list of what we've designated in the budget. We may not actually expend all of that.
That is sort of our estimate of where we stand at this point after 9 months of data.
So it is what we've spent.
It is an estimate, three months of estimates and 9 months of actuals,
Okay.
all right? So like I say, this is sort of true up, and it's, after 36 years of budgeting, you find it's not really exact. It's sort of like a lot of, you have to guess where you're going to be, but you base it on trends. You have a pretty good estimate. I'm going to spend this contract out. I'm not going to spend that. If I've spent 30% of my budget on a contract in a given year, I know I'm not going to spend 100% of it, so you can budget that, you can project it at something less than that by the end of the year. But what Frank's doing is being fairly conservative at this point, so that we don't underestimate expenditures and overestimate what we might have to spend the following year.
Okay. Thank you.
Government accounting doesn't, it takes a little bit of getting used to, sorry. So on the property tax, then the sales tax, like I said, Frank said, our consultants are projecting a decrease under actuals. And that's partly because you'll notice in the retail center here, we do have some vacancies that we have not had in the past. And so that's affected some of the revenues that we're going to receive, or have received. So the decrease of 25,000.
Robbie, are you trying to signal something?
I
There.
didn't know if you could hear me or not.
Yeah, now we can, yes.
Barely, yes.
So, you're showing a $400,000 increase year over year in budget. Are you gonna go over what that is?
Could you
Oh,
guys hear? So there's a $400,000 increase year over year. Are you guys gonna go over what that is what he stated?
The 4.3 versus 3.9.
That would be what's available to spend that's what 4.4, and that's sort of what we're going to start talking about when we get to the next section of the budget. Yes,
So yes, you're right, Robbie.
Yes.
He's gonna go over that.
we're going to go over that. So our overall increase in general fund revenue, just revenue, is 45,000 over the current year budget. So just straight general fund revenue is about $45,000 increase. Now we're going to start getting into how we're going to spend that 4.5 million. And it starts to add up real quickly. You'll recall we spent about 1.8 million of our 4.5 on law enforcement contract. And that is going up another 83,000 next year. That's an external cost, a 4.8% increase that we don't have much control over. I've already negotiated, we started at about 7 to 8% and able to discuss and negotiate with the sheriff down to about 4.8%. So there's a combination of reasons for that. Largely, it has no change in staffing. There's the cost of their pension and their negotiated salary increases, and then the cost of the overhead that the sheriff charges us for the events that they attend, and they bring in extra staffing. So when they do that, that's something they're starting to charge us. So that's the 83,000. For animal care, you just approved in May the continuation. We're decreasing about, based on some discussions I've had with them, our cost about 20,000. So there's a favorable, and that's again external. So we are decreasing that. So just those two items alone, that 400,000 increase that you saw, we just lost 60,000 of it with no control whatsoever of us, right? So if you mentally kind of do some tabulations, you start seeing something there, kind of keeping a running record. Now, the next thing is, typically in past years, and I want to say last year we gave about 16,000 toward our reserve. Our reserve actual balance, general fund, unaccounted reserve that you can spend however you want is about 1.55 million. The council has a policy that cannot exceed 50%. We are under the 50%. I want to say we're in the 47 to 48% range right now. The council in the past had put more into to get to 50%, but last couple of years as one of the balancing tools, we didn't add as much to the reserve as we've done in the past. That is a discretionary amount. You can add money to that. You can take money out of that reserve. You can do what you want to with that reserve. We are, from an accounting practice, we are in a very, very good financial position relative to other counties up and down the state. A 50% or 47% reserve is extremely well funded for a city. We are in a very positive position. That means basically we have we could go 6 months of a year without, and lose 6 months of our revenue and survive. That's a very good position to be in. Things happen. $1.5 million, that's in a good term. In a bad term, as we all know, the estimate for the Mesa Henderson storm drain was pretty close to $1 million. So $1 million to repair that. So if we had to incur that totally ourselves, that would have been 2/3 of our reserve right there. So you see 1.5 million, I'm sorry, 50% seems like a lot, but 1.5 million isn't a lot in today's scheme of things.
And is there a separate reserve for other projects that we pulled stuff from for that? Because I seem to remember we took $1 million out of this and we didn't put $1 million back in, but there was there was another account that we took some out of?
We utilized some of the fund balance that was available for infrastructure, roughly, I believe, 180,000.
It was a weird line item. So we don't have another.
No, this is
Separate
our
reserve,
reserve. This
right.
this is our general fund discretionary reserve.
Okay. And there
Completely
aren't any-
discretionary, unaccounted, unallocated.
Are you thinking of the Sycamore project?
I was thinking there was like an infrastructure reserve. There was some other thing
Yes.
that there is.
You're correct.
There-
There was an infrastructure reserve.
And we use that reserve to fund our budget for the current year.
Correct.
Okay, so is that infrastructure reserve zero now? And,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
And is there a plan to replenish that? Is that
Well,
part of your?
that's up to the council to decide what they want to do. That's sort of the discretionary, what you want to do.
Okay.
There's like 3 pages of issues we had.
We'll come to it later then, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, you'll get to it now, but you kind of tell us, hey, we want to, tonight we're not really voting on it, but if you want to say to us, hey, we want to rebuild it, we want to rebuild it.
That seems worth, like, we've already seen we needed to use it, and it seems like that's an important one to try to go back to.
That's, we can incorporate
Yeah.
something, if that's sort of, that's the kind of thing we need some direction tonight. Just give us, hey, we'd like to build something in, so when you come back, can you build something in there, so.
I'd like, Mr. Franks, you mentioned that we're in a very enviable position for our cash reserves relative to other
Yes.
public agencies and cities throughout California. However, I'd like to caution that about 20 years ago, we went through a state budget crisis, and the state started looking at agencies and cities with large cash reserves to possibly just take that money for the state to balance the state budget. So we want to be careful not to be too well funded, because we could just lose that money in the as the state gets into future budget problems. And I anticipate we will see some state budget difficulties in the not too distant future.
You're correct, yeah.
I do want to add too that this general fund cash reserve, it was meant for an emergency cash reserve. So
Right.
if there was any type of emergency in which the city did not have available funding for whatever reason, that city council could go to this reserve to pay for that emergency.
Okay,
We're not spending reserves.
he said we're not spending reserves. You'll recall he called it the Pension Stabilization Program, but it's PARS. It's, I forget what the acronym stands for, but basically the council had agreed to put $100,000 for 4 consecutive years and to reduce our unfunded liability. So this will be the 3rd year, and this allows we put it into a trust fund, basically. Every year, the $100,000 goes into a trust fund. So we put $200,000 over the last 2 years into it. That trust fund earns greater money than we would otherwise earn if we'd made that contribution directly to CalPERS. So after 4 years, it's our belief we'll be close to 80% funded of our retirement system. So 80% funded is considered extremely well funded for a pension system. Typically, pension systems in California are anywhere from 70 to 80. But if you're 80 or above, you're in really good shape. You don't want to be 100% because if you get returns on your investment, you're going to be overfunded. So you never want to, you want to be at that point. The unfunded liability never means what you're paying out. It means over the course of the obligation, that's how much you would pay. That's how long people live for their retirement, et cetera. So we never have that bill come due all at once, but it's something that we're trying to stabilize. So as CalPERS is lowering their, what they call their discount rate or their interest rate that they're returning, they're lowering it to 7%, a return on investment. So they're saying they're earning 7% over a 5-year smoothing pattern. If they were at 7.5%, by reducing it to 7, they're saying that means that the employers, the cities, the agencies that are involved have to contribute more money to them to make up the payment. And so as they're reducing it, our unfunded liability has grown. So the idea here is us to put money, advance payment of it, so we don't have that hit, if you will, that other entities are going to have, because they're stepping it down at CalPERS. So we'll be in a position where we don't have that sort of step-down problem.
And with the Section 115 trust money, there is greater discretion with similar, if not better, security to gain a better rate of return. Correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Correct. The law allows entities to go beyond what is as far as investing, in instruments that a general entity could not. For our general fund monies, for example, it's pretty tied with regards to state law what the city can invest those monies in. But yes, with the Section 115 trust, it allows you to increase your investing strategy to being moderate, even very risky, which
We have not. We've stayed at very, very low risk.
Right.
So we're getting. It's a long-term type of investment. So we're actually doing about reasonably well for that, but we're not doing great, if you will. So there's no real high risk at this point. For us, it's setting money aside for we know we have a pending obligation. That's what we're basically doing.
Thank you.
Then what we've got money for is potentially it's a rebudget. We had $50,000 budgeted for Greenbelt, Wanda Greenbelt. The rainy weather has allow us to move forward without doing a lot. The Greenbelt is green, but it's going to turn brown here in the summer, and I think we at some point would like to budget something. What the council would want to do with that is a discretionary item, and you'll see it's discretionary, what they want to budget or not budget. So you'll see it says like dollars pending council direction. That $50,000 is sort of the carry forward that we have not spent. Councilman Zimmerman, that's one of that's some of the 50,000 that we're not spending because we haven't done anything with it. And basically, we hadn't really come to an agreement as a council what we want to do with that. So the past council had been somewhat divided on what the plans should have would be. And it's our hope that we can get something moving forward in a positive manner in this coming fiscal year. Page number 7.
Sorry, real quick on that.
Sure.
And it's not like we say on those, well, we had this 3 years ago for 50,000 and 2 years for 50,000 and 1 year for 50. It's not like we're saying, well, maybe we should be spending $200,000 on this now because it's 4 years we haven't done this.
No, it is a 50,000
could, if we wanted
rebudget.
to.
And I don't want to really go into 1 to 2 because I don't have as much history as some of them, but there were plans drawn several years ago, and the project was a really, I don't even know how to describe it. It was not adopted, but it was a much more expensive project. I want to say between 100 and 200,000 was the estimate. I'm best of my recollection, don't quote me, please. But it was a much more expensive project at the time. The council opted not to move forward on it after having a public hearing on it. So they sort of came to a standstill at that point, and that's where we still are. 50,000 was sort of budgeted at a minimum if we were just simply to probably fix sprinklers, fix all the pumps, fix the timers, and fix the broken pipes, et cetera, that we have over there. We would probably spend less than that, but we probably maybe half of that, but we've just put 50,000 aside because some of the council people had said, well, we want to do something else. We don't just want to fix the sprinklers, we want to do something else. So we set a sum aside and the council said, okay, I think there was some discussion on this last year and they said, well, let's just put, 50,000, and that was the decided number. There was no real determination of what that 50,000 was going to be spent on, as I recall.
That's my understanding.
So it is something that I would like to sort of move forward with, and we don't want to just rebudget, we want to do something.
Right.
What that is, it's up to the council.
Public land and what the city looks like, that's one of those few visible public areas that kind of presents what Villa Park looks like to the public, so. Yeah.
Okay, so the next page, on page 7, what you'll see is some items we started to budget that we want to, there are rebudgets that we have to do, some or don't. We do need, we have a phase replacement where we replace 2 to 3 computers and on our desk. And as you're well aware, we each have computers on our desk and it's a really efficient tool and it allows us to do a lot of things much faster. And we have some old hard drives. So we try and replace screens and hard drives on anywhere from 3 to 5 year basis type of thing. We have some that are older than that. I think mine's older than that. And it is extremely slow and we get problems with sometimes even doing upgrades with it. So we're trying to do on a phased approach and a logical approach, hitting a couple, 2 or 3 a year. And that's where we're doing. And that allows us, 5,000 is, we spend maybe half of that, but that allows us to, if we have any sort of real, if we have a hard drive, for instance, that we had go this year for our audio system in the back that had to be replaced, those are the kinds of monies that we typically will use. So we've set aside money there. The general plan, we had 22,000, that'll be a rebudget. That's an external issue, but that comes into some of the 400,000 that we're talking about for next year. The housing element that we have an update that we're going to have to start doing, and we start working on, I believe Councilman Collicott's talked, and we're going to have a council workshop at that coming up here. But that's one of the things that's required by law. Externally, we're going to have to do a housing element update, and that's going to be one of our biggest challenges in the coming years. So we have a consultant that's helping us, and it's going to involve a lot of thought, if you will, I guess is the best way to say it. And Councilman Collicott can add a lot, I think, there.
Well, it'll be a challenge to the community, yeah.
The next item is, you'll recall that the council approved an MOU to allow us to participate in the North Service area, to allow us to participate in access to the shelter beds, and that would be the construction operation of shelters in Buena Park and Placentia. our annual contribution is, annual contribution plus the initial construction costs for next year will be about $8,400. The annual cost is
About 1,000, right?
a couple $1,000 or, but the initial construction is where the hit is. So next year we'll have to pay the initial construction costs, and that'll be I want to say close to 5 to 6,000 is construction, and then our share of it, and then the ongoing operational cost is 1 to 2,000, again, roughly that range. Again, the item 2 here on the bottom is budget contingency. This, we have not spent. We spent maybe 20,000 of this year. Those are things that occasionally will come up during the course of a year. I think we bought some pedestrian signs for Serrano and some of those types of things here and there on it, but we haven't spent a whole lot of money under discretionary. In the past, Frank and I had suggested that we remove this item from the budget, but the council was pretty adamant that they wanted this in the budget. So that's something that is a discretionary item. We can lower that amount significantly. We can take it out, or we can leave it as is. And I think the argument made at the time to keep it included, and Councilman Nelson was the strongest advocate, and actually at the time, I believe Councilwoman Fasenelli also was advocating, because things come up and there are things that have to happen during the course of a year. And during that year, having to have the ability to spend those things without having to come back to council, we meet once a month, was problematic. I only have authority to spend up to 20,000, so I can't spend a lot of it really fast. But as you can see, I just don't spend a lot of it. Or let me just rephrase that. I don't spend it as a general rule, and the circumstances haven't required us to spend it this year. We have some issues that could happen. We have some cracking right out here in front of the City Hall cement that's starting to crack, and you can see some lifting. The compressor on our air conditioner is on its last legs, but we have inched it on from year to year. That could cost us $30,000 to $40,000 really quickly because of the age. And you'll notice why this part of the building is warmer than the back part of the building, because there are 2 different compressors and things. So there's some things that could easily come up during the course of the year that could require us to spend this candidly. I don't want to downplay the fact that there's needed. So Councilman Nelson and Councilwoman Fasenelli were adamant that we needed to have the ability and set aside sort of money in case things like that happen. They do happen. I guarantee you, things happen. The other month we had.
We got a thumbs up from Robbie, by the way.
Okay, we had a fire, the fire extinguisher battery, the fire alarm system, the battery went out, and we spent close to $1,000 just having to replace that. And that was not something that had been replaced probably for 5 or 6 years, because none of us had been around when it was previously replaced. And we had it previously inspected, but they had to do that. So things happen. There's a reason to have a contingency, but it's up to you how much you want to put in there. You want to turn to page 8. One of the things that came up last year was I was really adamant, the ACCOC, the Association of Orange County Cities.
Robbie's got a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Robbie.
Robbie's got a question. Yes, go ahead, Robbie.
Steve,
I can't
I
hear
can't hear you.
Can you hear him?
They're hard to make out.
You're hard to make out, Councilman.
Steve, can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
we can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, what I'd like to understand is, are we able to do anything with a generator for the city in the event that there's a problem?
Yeah, we did, for the size of the generator that that was recommended, we did an estimate. It was $50,000. And I was of the inclination at this point that Bill Tarrant and I sort of did an assessment with it, and we sort of said, right now, I wasn't totally comfortable with spending or coming to the council for a $50,000 expense at this time. I think the delay.
It's the feedback delay.
Okay,
But we certainly can add that in. That's what I need to hear from you. If you want me to put something like that in there, we can put it in there. Okay,
I suggest that
Concern
rather
was if
than
we- if,
specifically
if
identified
we
as a
have,
generator, we talk
power
about.
outage or something like that
line
in the
i-
city.
Hold on,
and
Councilman.
people
Robbie-
being able
Robbie,
to
go ahead and
run
hold
their
that thought real quick.
air conditioners Or so forth, at home, and, you know, the city hall can be a refuge for people during the hot months and those types of things. That's the only thing I was thinking about.
Yeah, yes, okay, that's a good point, so we'll address that, something aside, we can do that and come back and put something toward, but,
Yeah, if, I just suggest that we identify that line item more generally, just say power backup, because a lot of places are going to battery backup now. Batteries are becoming much more efficient, so it may be much more cost-effective. as
okay,
a
we can
backup.
explore that, yeah.
But if we just leave it general, so we can explore the
Okay.
options.
ACCOC, we had not paid the membership this year, it's about $6,000. But they have changed leadership at this ACCO, staff leadership, and actually changed their board as well. So I think they've sort of changed in direction and turning a direction. We have continued to participate, we have not paid dues. They are revising the schedule, because I've told them $6,000 is unreasonable for us, it's just too high. The new interim director has agreed with me, so he's going to his board to come up with a revised fee schedule. But in the event he does that, and the membership continues in the direction I think it's going right now, we're in a more positive note, and I think it's become less of an advocacy, more of an advocacy group and less of a trying to be a leadership and direct us to go somewhere. So I think and I think all of you have participated in ACCOC events and realize there is some value to attending those. The question is, I don't want them telling us what to do. I want them to represent what we want to do. And that was sort of the issue of the old leadership. So that's an issue that's, again, discretionary. One of the things that it would not be, it would be fee offset. It would not, it's a discretionary item, but we're talking in probably June, because of some federal delays, we'll be starting the passport program here, where we issue passports. We're charging a fee on that, and depending on workload, we'll be able to address some staffing, the fee will pay for the staff that have to do it. So it would be a revenue neutral expense. So we'll have to address that, or want to address that when we have, but probably not for a while until we get some sort of sense of what the workload might be. We do get a lot of inquiries, so I suspect we'll have a demand. What that demand means, I don't know, but we may want to address that as part of the budget. Typically, it's up to the council. We have in the past addressed salary merit. That's a discretionary item. Again, the next item down is technology enhancements. As you're seeing today, demonstrated by our limited ability to teleconference, we do need to do some upgrades. The mayor and I have had some discussions, and he's been able to forward some information on our website enhancements that we need to do. We'd like to put some money aside for there. Now, we haven't put a figure on that, but what I'm saying is there's an area we'd like to do. We'd also like to do Councilman Nelson, before he left, and I think he had pushed, there are some upgrades that we'd like to make to our financial system that we'd like to make. Okay. The other item we have here is we have budgeted $18,500 in the past for council travel. That's a discretionary item. If you want to add to it, delete it, whatever you want to do. I highlight it only because every year the council has dealt with it on an individual basis. So that's up to you to decide sort of, as we move forward, hey, we need to add more, it's not enough, or we need, that we can reduce there.
Steve, what do you mean dealt with it on an individual basis?
They've always
What are we
addressed how much we
projected
budget in that account. So,
Individual line item basis.
Okay.
What are we projected to spend this year, Steve?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you speak closer to the mic, Robbie?
Okay,
Can you speak closer to the mic?
What are we projected to spend this year?
We will spend pretty close to our budget. Collectively. I think those are the monthly reports you get each council meeting, and if you go back to the last report, you'll be able to see exactly where we stand, pretty close. I think we report that on monthly. That's the last agenda item every month. So you can get that number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but as I recall, we were pretty close to budget by year end.
I'd like to see that. I'm just trying to figure out how that's possible, since
It's itemized on your, there's an itemized report that you get every month.
Okay.
That would be in your agenda package. And if you go back, you'll be able to see it. Itemized meaning by council member and by event that they attend, and travel event. That's all.
This would include previous council members for this fiscal year then, I guess?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
That's correct.
yes. Okay, so some of the assumptions that we want to talk about for next year is the non-general fund expenditures as well, because we've talked a little bit about that. There are monies that are set aside. The street rehabilitation project, the next phase, we've talked about SB1 monies having about what is it?
Roughly 98,000 with regards to SB1, but in total, gas tax, probably roughly 250,000.
Now, in the
revenue?
past, what we've done, because that we've kind of, the dollars amounts are fairly small, we have continually done a 2-year project to try and accumulate large enough sums so we can get more significant work done. So for instance, the current year project is closer to $1 million
Correct.
where we're at. But that's, again, we have some gas tax money and SB1 monies, and the council will need to give us some direction on where they want to go with that.
That's not, but that's the special fund. That's not part of the general fund.
The council can direct general funds to go there as well. There's nothing precluding general funds being spent on those projects. General funds are completely discretionary. What we're saying is we have gas tax and SB1 monies that have to be spent on that, and that's just under 300,000.
Yeah, as I showed at the last council meeting, this is a map of the city streets, and it should identify, Akram has, our city engineer has identified those streets in Villa Park that have had any kind of maintenance since 2011, and this includes in red the streets that are currently programmed to be rehabilitated in 2019, 2020. My estimate is that over the past 9 years, that accounts to about 10% of our streets. So on a straight line projection, that would mean that we are, at our current rate, we're rehabilitating each of our streets in Villa Park once a century. So we do have some pretty dilapidated streets around town, and I'd like the council to give some serious consideration to stepping up our street maintenance budget or program so that we can catch up. I think the example I gave at the last council meeting, the city of Los Alamitos, which is also a small city, they rehabilitate their streets on a 8-year cycle, and we're at about a once per century cycle. So that just shows the disparity in how we're maintaining our city. We have some significant, I can give some good examples of streets that are not currently on our 2019-2020 program that we approved last week. For example, Serrano, Adams Ranch Road, Mesa, Dodson. There's a number of streets around town that that are lined with $1 million plus houses that have just dilapidated streets, and it's actually we'd be saving money by addressing that stuff on a more expedited basis. So give that some consideration as we go through this budget process.
Okay, every year we have rain that hit us, and every year we have, we have the trails, which are basically DG, decomposed granite, and we lose we have damage on those. And I think the Kabar's in the audience, and they recognize that a lot of that has to do with the angle at which those, they put DG. So over the course of the years, we probably have decomposed granite trails where we shouldn't really have those. That wasn't, it just isn't the best place for them because the rains by nature, they're going to take them out. So you replace them, whatever. So we have 25,000 that we have typically budgeted. And one of the things we're talking about with that group as well is sort of looking at different types of solutions as opposed to decomposed granite. But we do have some significant rivets, if you go around some of our trails, that have to be addressed. So in some form or another, we're gonna have to do some work on some of our trails this year. So there's a 25,000 that we had just tentatively, that's a carry forward of what we typically budgeted. We do spend that every year. So we spent, 2 years ago, I think we spent 50,000, when we had that big gush in 2017. So that's there. The next item is, we have talked about upgrades here in this chamber. We get what we call PEG monies, where by having the cable companies, they give us a portion of money they dedicate. So we will have about 31,000 or 35,000 next year. And we're planning on putting in some upgrades and doing some things to allow us to teleconference and do some things, have automated screens and things as opposed to pulling down the old 1960s screens and things like that. So this is money that has to be spent on communication with the public. Council chamber upgrades are typically what every city uses those monies for, because that's where your foremost opportunity to communicate with the public is during council meetings or at community meetings. So the types of things we've talked about here are wiring upgrades, automation upgrades, as you can see, screen upgrades, et cetera. So we'll have 35,000 and we'll be moving forward on that as well. We have street maintenance of 40,000 we had put in for potholes, which we put in last year. We definitely think those types of money should be continually maintained every year. And you'll see, it was 25,000. I think we said 40,000 for the handicap. It was 25,000. But we would recommend that we rebudget and do some more because that was only the first start of the project on that. So we'll recommend monies, non-general funds, go forward on that.
Is the annual street maintenance, the rebudget of $40,000 for potholes, does that include the crack seal?
Steve,
Yes,
Robbie, go ahead. Hold that question just for 1 second. Go ahead and finish.
That was my question.
You wanna answer that?
yes, it does.
Okay,
Hang on, let Robbie have a turn then. Robbie, go ahead.
Councilman, do you have a question?
Mayor Pro Tem, go ahead.
Steve, I was gonna say, I think the $35,000 is not enough to,
He said that $35,000 is not enough.
Yeah,
to upgrade the council chambers and the council with technology. Chad, you might chime in, buddy, but I'm telling you, for all the AV and rewiring and everything that you're planning on doing, I don't think 35,000 is enough.
that's why we're listing it, because we think we need to put something in there. So we have 35,000, but it's one of those sort of items that's pending, and where we'll come back with we need to put more in. I agree. We could do a lot more.
So the process on that, wouldn't you guys give us a proposal for what you want to do and then say, this is going to cost us $60,000? Then we'd say, yes, that's approved for the budget?
Right, so right now we put 35,000. What we did, identified for the 35,000 was simply the funds that are extraordinary funds that are allotted for that purpose specifically. There's nothing, again, prohibiting you from, that's why we have it listed here. We could come back and say it's gonna cost us 60,000 or 75,000.
Right.
But we're raising the radar and saying, toward the city council chamber upgrades, we have 35,000, it's an item, we're gonna have to put something in the budget for it. You could say, well, that's all you get, or we'll put more into it, or what the budget will be. So that's sort of a prioritization.
You're asking for direction, and I guess I'm saying that coming to us and saying, we want to do something about this, how much do you want to give us, is different from you coming to us and saying, here's what we want to do, it's going to cost us $60,000, and we can then say, oh, well, we'll give you 20, do this part of it.
I think that's our plan, but what I'm saying is the 35,000 is listed because that's what we have available that is sort of, if you don't spend it, you lose it.
Right, it's
Okay.
pegged for.
It's pegged for this money, if you will. So we may come back with a project, but I'm listing it as something, we're gonna put something in the budget for council center upgrades.
Got it.
The equals 35,000 is, you've got 35,000 to start with, all right?
So the 31,750 that was 35 from last year.
No, that's 31 from last year, and then we're gonna get
Right,
another
the
couple
budget amount
thousand.
was 35 from last year, and you spent part of that, but not the 31 is what is left over.
No, we didn't have 35, we're saying we'll have 35 for next year of that money.
okay.
Use, yeah.
I see.
So 31 plus a couple thousand we'll get for next year. So that'll put us at 35. So we'll have 35 that's already set aside for that purpose. We're gonna come together, like you say, with a proposal, this is what's gonna cost. But of that amount, we may have X percent already budgeted with the 35.
Got it.
That's what I'm signaling to you, so you got money.
What projects do we have in mind? Obviously, the screen is important. Having completely rewired a home with audio,
Right.
top-end audio video installation equipment, including 148-inch TV screens and
Right.
all kinds of other stuff, and having friends in that business. What type of projects are we looking to put the 35,000 towards? Because I know the screen won't, in and of itself, come anything close to that.
Well, what has been recommended, or what we're gonna talk about is some screens, some flat screens that we have, larger flat screens, possibly 2 of them that would allow angles. The replacement of these screens here.
Okay.
Which are difficult visibility-wise for you all to see.
Agreed.
The cabling, if you'll notice during the course of a meeting, we cable and we run a cable and put a cord on, put a carpet on top of it, a throw rug on top of it.
The monthly trip hazard.
The monthly trip hazard, that needs to be fixed. We have the lighting system that needs to be kind of upgraded. We have the HDMI, the projector, if you will, up there is a good 1990s era projector that needs to be replaced and is, so what we want to do is, we've talked about getting some more advanced state-of-the-art features, because this room is used not just by us, but by a lot of it.
Right.
The other thing we have is the temperature control and things like that in the room, that there are control centers you can create. So there's a lot of opportunity if you have a lot of money.
Right.
So what the microphone, if you look at every one of their microphones on there, they're all sort of taped together with duct tape and whatever.
This right here?
Yeah, so those are sort of the things that we need to upgrade those.
The reason why I asked that question is to flush this out
Right.
for public transparency purposes. Because I tend to agree. I think that, 35,000 isn't a whole lot of money, but it certainly isn't just the screen. There's a lot of other things that I think the general public, the taxpayers, don't really understand and appreciate unless it's brought out.
So what our intent would be, as Councilman Zimmerman has asked, is to come forward with a proposal. In fact, we met with the second group today. We're trying to meet with different providers that will come in and give us some estimates, because we want to bid and not just give somebody. But we would come through and we've asked for a pricing on different tiers of different things we could do. And then we would come to the council and say, okay, if we do this, it's going to cost us this, and we have money for that. If we want to go above, we'd have to add or whatever. So we'll come to the council, because I can't spend more than 20,000 on my own, so we'll come with a full proposal. But I do intend to put something in the budget for council upgrades. We really do need to move into the next generation.
Yeah, I could see like a wireless mic or something to tie in.
Sure.
that Would do away with the cables and,
We want to do Bluetooth capabilities, so the screens, that's one of the suggestions, was maybe the flat screens that would allow us to do Bluetooth, so we wouldn't have to have a projector. You could do it straight from your laptops, and anybody could bring in their laptop and connect in. Then the other issue we have, unfortunately, is our Wi-Fi is sort of limited in the city hall. We do not even have the fiber optic cable. We are very limited in what we have, so that's something that we're trying to upgrade and need to upgrade there. So part and parcel, there's a lot to it. It's not just screens or this and that. It's an itemized full project.
Thank you.
Okay, going back to annual street maintenance.
Yeah.
And the council is not the only one that uses, we have the public that uses that room quite a bit.
You're right, the councilman, Mayor Pro Tem has
Technology.
indicated that the public uses it, and they always ask us, what sort of features do you have? And, we have a lot, I get calls pretty much once a week saying, I can't hook my laptop to this, how do I do it? And I'm on the phone telling them how to do it at 7 o'clock at night or whatever, or weekends explaining. So we do need to understand this is a community room used by a lot of people, and to the extent we charge them for it, and we need to have some 2,000
Significant
amenities
updates.
to it, if you will.
Okay, now street maintenance.
Sure.
Okay. I'd like to see if we could increase this budgeted amount. We recently, or this fiscal year, we're doing a few streets. But this is a good investment. Basically, what this includes is not just potholes, but as the streets crack and age, where we have subsidence, going in and fixing that to maintain the quality of the street before it deteriorates to the level where we have to go and rehabilitate the entire street. If we go down any of our streets, in fact, for example, Prado Woods is in relatively good condition, but it has cracks. If we go and we put some crack seal in that, we can keep that street looking good much more for a much longer lifetime. If we don't, those cracks will provide opportunities for water to get in, the street will deteriorate, and suddenly we're talking about not only a larger cost, but it's aesthetically, the street aesthetically deteriorates. So I think putting a lot more money into street maintenance will pay off great dividends for us as we go forth.
Wouldn't it be handy to have kind of some of the other street projects and this put side by side so we could see a list? Because I know like we're going to get a bunch from the gas tax. We're going to get a bunch of money to do street repairs and improvements. If we had like a section where we talked about all of that together and how much money is being spent, where it's coming from for each one, and then we could look at, well, that's great that we're spending this much, but maybe we really need to be spending a greater amount, or to have a kind of a whole section on that, I think is probably a good idea.
And for the benefit of the new council members, it might be helpful to have forward them the consulting report that we had from a few years ago that stated we need to be spending approximately, I believe it was $1 million a year, if I recall. Don't quote me on the numbers, to keep our street PCI at the level it was, so that it's not just my opinion, Councilmember Collicott's opinion, or Mayor Pro Tem Pitt's opinion, or some random member in the audience. It's actually based upon a consulting report, somebody who was hired to independently evaluate the situation.
We can get that,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Okay, that's what we're working at this point, and we've already got some input from you. And if you have other things that you want us to do, tonight's the night to speak up and say, could you add to think about this or whatever, so.
Why don't we start over here with Councilwoman Miles?
So I had mentioned back in January that I attended that State of the City address, and it was just a really informative, beneficial event. Sitting as a participant and looking out and seeing, the city come together for that, and they did a video show of some new businesses that had come into town, both just retail as well as some hotels that were happening. Obviously, that doesn't apply to us, but I just kind of would like to see some money put towards maybe starting that tradition of having a State of the City that happens January, February sometime, and the mayor would give a report on budget, on any new businesses that came into town.
It's interesting that you mentioned this. I've spoken to the mayor of San Juan, and I've actually, when I became mayor, I mentioned it to a couple of supporters that this was something, but I didn't want to specifically, address it at that point in time. But I think now that we've got a few months of progress, the new council, I think it's something we could put together, whether it's, are you talking about a newsletter or?
No, I'm talking about an event. I'm talking about a white tent outside event that the public comes, that we could even partner with the foundation and they could help run it, or we get sponsors. I'm really good at throwing parties, so.
Okay. What kind of budget do you have in mind? I'm just concerned about the expenditure. 'Cause we have a lot of fantastic events, many of which you.
And this would not just be, it would be an event that would also be informative and bring out the community and you'd have all facets of the community, right? And so it would help increase membership for the foundation or the Rotary, and it would bring awareness to those groups. It would,
I was just going to say, especially given something like the the picnic for Villa Park that we don't have right now.
Yeah.
That kind of event that brings everybody together as the city, but then maybe as us as city councilship, providing leadership to say, this is what's going on in our city, get back involved, and here's what we want to do, bringing us all together. I think that kind of bonding or that kind of,
Why don't I,
I'm all for entertaining the idea, but we do have National Night Out and Taste of Villa Park. Those are two pretty phenomenal events.
I don't know if Tasteville Park's gonna go on anymore, to be honest with you.
why don't we see, I'll get together with the councilwoman, and talk to her and get together with some of the other cities and see what, and then also talk to the foundation and maybe the Rotary and see what other groups might be interested in co-sponsoring it, if you will. So that the expense isn't entirely borne, because typically, as I know in other cities, it's not borne entirely by the city, it's borne
Correct.
by
you get
sponsors.
Sponsors.
So I
Correct.
think that's something that we could explore, and if I can certainly work with Councilwoman Miles on that and come up with some sort of estimate or dollar amount that we might have for consideration as part of we could talk about more in the June meeting.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to work with you on that and see what we could do to get something off the ground if it's feasible. San Juan does have some very well-heeled groups.
Well, and you
having
gotta
grown up
start somewhere, and it would give a validity, I think, to our city as well, to have mayor and council up there, and and it's a brief thing, but then, you could even just do a wine and cheese thing, right? Where you just have wine and cheese, it's adults, and you get to talk about any upcoming projects, you get to talk about budget, you get to talk about good things, maybe some negative things, but it's just a big informative
Well,
evening.
Go ahead.
I think it's a good idea to have a state of the city. I wish I had done one when I was a mayor, or the mayor. It could maybe just to kick it off, we could just start with a presentation during one of our council meetings by the mayor of, this is where things stand in our city, this is where our budget, maybe in conjunction with the adoption of the budget or following the adoption of the budget, that, this is what we have, this is what we have programmed going forward, this is what we accomplished last year, and these are the significant opportunities that we have as a city, these are some of the significant threats, that kind of stuff. And invite the public to come in and also just provide their general comments on where they would like to see the city going.
So far I've got state of the city, accomplishments and challenges moving forward. And
Well, like
an
we have a
event to
new
bring it all
business
together.
that has moved in, Laylo, or I think is what it's called. And, you do a little video montage of some of the new businesses, and Wakai, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. They're relatively new as well, and just shows the growth that we're going through. And I think even if you were just to have a small little thing and start small, everyone loves to get together. I don't know how you would gauge if you had it in conjunction with a regular city council meeting. There's really no way to gauge if you ever could move forward with it, because you're not going to be able to tell how many people actually was interested in watching it. So I'm more than happy to spearhead it. I know some of the costs based on what I've done with the Taste and other events that I've done. Can definitely scale it down, and you can get sponsors. But it's more one of those, you're just, in my opinion, you're making the council available, and it's a good, fun time out, and community comes together and you get to meet people that maybe you didn't realize were your neighbors. And you can try it once. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But also, on a side note, with the Wanda Greenbelt, I love that it's green because of all the rain, and Mother Nature did that. I definitely want to see something happen with that once it starts to turn brown, or something we can do to prevent it from turning brown. And I know there's a lot of issues and talk with, dogs and dogs allowed at schools or not allowed at schools. Or I would love to see maybe. I saw some of the plans from when the council had talked about converting that into something else, and I liked a part of it, and I liked the part that it kind of brought back to the citrus times, And you could have a cute, a walking path that also highlighted all the different citrus, the orchards that were here. And you could have, in that walking path, flowers that represent, what the hummingbird loves. You put all those flowers there, all the citrus trees, line it with citrus trees and like an arbor, Ellis, and then maybe like a dog run, a dog park maybe for people to be able to let their dogs actually go someplace that they're not going to be chased off or criticized. Just some thoughts to throw there for that.
Anything further?
Well, actually, yes. One day, I'd love to do a winter wonderland where we, in conjunction with the Sanator, some of the criticisms about the Sanator is that, if they're late or they're early and they only get 5 minutes, and where are we going to stop? And what if we just think about this?
Truck in snow?
You brought in a whole bunch of snow. You turn this into a winter wonderland. Santa's here, and people can come at will when they want, stay as long as they want. You could have vendors, kind of like a Halloween fest, but it's winter. And you could have, deers, the kids petting the deer, and it just is another flip on the whole meet Santa and take your picture. And then that way you don't have to worry about, upsetting anybody because we missed a street or we were on time or not on time. So that's just something too, that community-based event.
Okay.
That's it for now.
Councilman Zimmerman, your wish list, sir.
I think I've kind of expressed, hopefully I've indicated as we've gone through your ideas. If I wasn't clear on this before, the reserves that we had for infrastructure, the stuff that we've set aside, if there's other areas where we have put money into specific earmarked categories, I don't necessarily like earmarks in general, but I like the idea of making sure that if we know these things are once every 10 years or once every while, we're going to have a storm drain blow, or we're going to have something that happens, that we've got that money there, and it's, we just had one, and instead of it depleting our entire resources and our reserves going to nothing, it used part of it, and it came from somewhere else, and the city weathered it, and that's, I think, a really responsible way to use our money, is to make sure that we're planning those things in the future, and we're looking at ahead for what pitfalls we might run into. I think I agree. I would love to have really nice streets in our city that match our town, that make our entire community look as good as the homeowners put into it along all of the rest of the public land. So that includes our street repairs and the Wanda Greenbelt. I think those are, I would like Villa Park to be all that it can be.
Councilman Colacott.
Excuse me. My focus again goes back to street maintenance. There's, I think that outside of maintaining our working with the sheriff department to maintain our low crime rate, maintaining our streets is the most effective contribution that the city council can make towards maintaining and improving property values through the city. And that should be a very high priority. We've had some streets that have been allowed to deteriorate over decades. And I'd like to compliment staff. We are just finishing up a project on Valley Drive. I've walked that street for almost 40 years, and I remember from the earliest days when I was in Villa Park back in early 1980s, seeing that street and just being aghast at what terrible condition it was. And our staff has worked with the contractor, have aligned the street, put up curb and gutter, and repaved it. It now looks, it's not perfect. It was a difficult alignment because of all the land ownership issues, but we now have, that now looks like a street that belongs in Villa Park. Every street should start looking good. We should focus on what we can do to maintain our streets, to keep them in good condition so that they always look good, and aggressively rehabilitate those streets that, that seriously need attention. I think it was about 3 years ago when Bob Wolf over on Dodson made a presentation to our city council during one of our budget sessions, and he pointed out that he's now been a resident there for 44 years on Dodson, and he has approached the city every year for the past 44 years saying, when are you going to fix this street? And I think it's about time that we step up, fix that street and a number of others throughout the city. Again, we've got million-dollar houses lining these streets, and we need to make the streets look like they belong there. So I think, so that's my wish list, that's my focus. That's also one of the things that we can't rely on anybody else to take care of. You know, we could get volunteers to spruce up Wanda Greenbelt and do a lot of, we can look at to the Community Services Foundation to put on other special events. We can't rely on anybody else to fix the streets. That's something we have to step up and take care of. And so that's my wish list.
Can I supplement something?
Go ahead.
So just to be clear, I thought when we were talking, it was just about stuff that wasn't on here. But to talk about stuff that's on here,
No, I mean, candidly, during the course of, if you want to add something, I mean, these are things, the things that's on there, we're going to address. And I know the councilman's, I think he's sort of making advocacy point if you want to make an advocacy, but I think those are, we're going to address everything that's in there. If you want us to emphasize it, you're certainly free to, but.
well, no, I was just gonna say, like, the council travel, I know that we have 3,500 per council member, but the mayor gets 4,500, and I don't know if the mayor actually, any mayor needs $1,000 more, and it's only $1,000, but I'm just saying, I don't know why we can't just all get along with 3,500, if that's the case, and
Absolutely
then.
no objection from me.
And then, that budget contingency, the 150,000 discretionary, what's the max in a year that's been used?
150.
That's the max that's been
It's
used in
been
1
used.
year for that?
It's been used, yes.
Even, okay. And
That's
then
why
as
the
far-
numbers were at that, because it's been used in past years.
And I agree that this, I mean, I totally agree, the streets, need to look good, but other things need to look good as well. And I'm gonna sound really ignorant right now, but when I drive into a neighborhood, I don't look at what the streets look like. I look at what the parks look like or what the houses look like, and I'm not saying they're not important. And I do think that Dodson, I've been on Dodson, it needs some help. Adams Ranch needs some help. But I am also hopeful. I went to that meeting at the Department of Transportation and got some information. I shared it with Steve, and there's a very lengthy process to fill out a 30-page application, but I'm up for it. So,
And I'll fill you in on that. I did some research. There's a minimum of $5 million grant requirement. And of that 5 million, you have to provide a 20% match set aside. So we would have $1 million requirement to participate. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It's just,
Yeah,
it
they
is,
mentioned
would
that.
involve a significant commitment by the city to participate. So that's unfortunately some of the problems of us being a small city is $1 million to us is a lot of money.
I don't know, but $1 million to get 5 seems like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I mean, but that's,
the good thing out of that, A, there was a face-to-face, they won't forget us. B, they said that if we get declined, that they will sit down with you and go over exactly why they denied the application, which I think
yeah, that'd be great.
is really helpful. But that's just a side note, you know.
It's a July 15th deadline, so
Deadline, yep.
we've got some time.
So, and that would be great. That would solve a lot of our street problems if we were able to do that. It's a shot in the dark, but you know, the worst they can say is no, and we won't know unless we try. Right?
Mayor Pro Tem Pitts.
Mayor Pro Tem, they're asking you any sort of items that you feel that we should be adding as well that aren't on the list?
Delay.
He's muted.
Hello, Mayor Pro Tem?
Needs to turn off mute.
He's gesturing
Sorry, I
to.
muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can
Go
hear you.
ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. I've been listening to everything, and I agree with a lot of the stuff that you talked about, Steve. I think there's some things for us to consider before the final budget is presented. One, I think we've got a lot of things coming at us, from the streets to technology in the center, to, DG trails, all those kinds of things. And I think you have done a masterful job at managing all those things and putting together a budget that's good for us to manage each of those. I've been on the council now for 3 years, and I know we've been talking about things like Wanda Greenbelt, technology upgrades in the council chambers. We're not the only ones that use the council chambers. Right now, that's our community center. And it's a lot of the public sees that. When you talk about driving down the streets, there are a lot of people inside and outside of Villa Park that take part in events there. And when we don't have very good technology, or, the place is not painted, or it's not up to date, things like that, people see that. So that's the face of Villa Park. It's not just the streets or the bushes or the flowers. It's our council chambers and our city hall. So I think you guys have done a masterful job over the years of managing things, but I would like to see some things get done to Wanda Greenbelt, to the technology, and also balance. I know that we've got, our streets we did an assessment. One of the things that I learned at SCAG this past week is, infrastructure is a big thing for the state and for a lot of the cities, but they also warned about being prudent and making sure that you don't, try to take it all on at one time, that you do it over time and do it based on the budget that you have available to you, and not try to overcompensate and have other things lose as a result of it. So I just think we've got to be cautious about how we approach these things. I trust our city manager. I trust our city engineers and so forth and on staff to give us the best recommendations possible for what we need to do with our city streets. And I don't think we need to overwhelm ourselves with spending a lot of money on just infrastructure and let everything else like Wanda Greenbelt and other things go by the wayside. Because again, I've been on council for 3 years and I've seen things slide for 3 years because we're doing other things, and I just don't think that's prudent for us. So I appreciate the balance, and I appreciate the job you guys are doing, and I look forward to seeing the final budget.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, I've got a few comments of my own here, and no particular order, but I think IT is a massive challenge. Our IT issues are tremendous, and it's disappointing that in year 3 of my time on council, we haven't seen significant updates in IT. We have IT professionals in the city, and yet we have some of the worst IT that I've ever seen of any city or any municipality, and I think we need to focus significant money in that direction within the city council chamber, within our staff computers, within our all aspects for IT. I even took the initiative and reached out to somebody who's very familiar with websites, and he, through another individual, did an audit of our website and all of the things that are broken or that should be improved so that we're at a basic level. And I've provided that to our city staff, something that would cost us potentially $5,000, $10,000. I don't know, because we need it. It's ridiculous that on a city phone or somebody's tablet or somebody's home computer, we can't do some of the things that other small cities can do. It's time we make that significant investment. I appreciate the concern with Wanda. I think the Wanda Greenbelt does need to have some money set aside for it. I absolutely do think that we need to have the sprinklers turned on. I think that we need to make sure that the valves are working correctly. And most importantly, before we start throwing a $50,000 number out there, we need to have a plan. If we don't have a plan of what we're going to do, that's a problem. We need to reach out to the community, make it a public-private partnership. The city certainly can step up and budget some money, but I don't hear a plan. I don't hear a cohesive plan. I don't see an ad hoc committee, and throwing money at a problem is just throwing money at a problem. It's a waste. So let's get together. Let's make it an important part of this budgeting process and this year and have a plan. And then let's fix what we need to fix, but then in coming years, spend a little bit more money and really execute that plan. But we need to have an ad hoc committee, a public-private partnership to get it really where the community wants it to be. Not where I want it to be, not where Councilwoman Miles or Mayor Pro Tem Pitts, but where our community. And that, I'm not singling them out, I'm just using them as an example. It should be the community's feedback to an ad hoc committee, and I like the idea of our historical roots. I think that's a fantastic idea for the record. But we need to understand what our budgetary constraints are. Council chambers. I absolutely agree with Mayor Pro Tem Pitts. I think that 35,000 is probably a starter for what we need to make this council chamber and community center a safe venue and a venue that represents the residents of Villa Park. So I would say 35, perhaps more. Obviously, our streets are of the utmost importance when it comes down to property values. With respect to my colleagues, I think that that is one of the most important things, that new residents, current residents, people who are coming here for functions, whether it's at City Hall or at somebody's private residence, whether it's a fundraiser, they look at those streets. And when your car is rattling your teeth and your fillings are falling out of your head, that's a problem. And we have a number of streets that are in the 50s and 60s, and that's not the kind of street that any resident should have. All of our streets should be at an 80 or above. We had a consultant that we paid a tremendous amount of money for, and we haven't followed that consultant's lead. We have an infrastructure committee, which is an independent entity made up of professionals that, unless I'm mistaken, is going to echo some of those sentiments. And I think that those are my priorities above and beyond what we already have here. Obviously, the handicap accessibility issue, sounds like we still have that money in the budget. I would encourage staff to spend that money at around the 4 major schools. If our kids and our parents and our handicapped residents don't have access to our community, and using those places as a starter, that's a problem. So thank you, and most importantly, I want to thank Steve and Frank for spending an inordinate amount of time, as well as our IT staff, to try to get this project put together and get it conveyed out to the public, and to get our Mayor Pro Tem available through the internet to us. Thank you.
Okay, we have Leah Cabara has wanted to speak. So I know it's out of order, but if
I'm happy to
I
indulge.
get the
Please.
indulgence of the,
Please. Please give us your name and your address and your relation.
I've got all the,
Great, thank you.
But I can repeat it. Leah Kabar again at 18392 Old Lamplighter Circle in Villa Park. Also a member of the Infrastructure Advisory Committee. And I'm chairman of the advisory committee, Infrastructure Advisory. But anyway, I just wanted to take just a brief moment and step up and urge the council to really pay attention and help fund the infrastructure in this city. I think the can has been kicked down the road for long enough, and a lot of the problems generally show themselves after bad weather conditions or severe rains like the ones we've had recently. But I want to urge council to fund it. It's a big ask. It's a lot of money, but I think it's going to pay dividends in all aspects, whether it's public safety, property values, etc. I'm an advocate for not just the street rehab. I also like the undergrounds, the stuff people don't see, don't look at unless something terrible happens, like the storm drain system. But I think that we can smartly and efficiently address all of our infrastructure needs hopefully at the same time. But it's going to take a big commitment of money from this council, and I hope that you'll prioritize infrastructure to that extent to help this community look the way it should look and not be ignored. We don't want to be, I know this is a very anti-tax community, and trying to get property tax or any sort of special taxes through to fund infrastructure is going to be a big hurdle. But we've seen that in our business. We've seen other cities who haven't touched their, or actually worked for one that hadn't touched their streets in 50 years, and that's exactly what they had to do. They had to pass a citywide special tax measure to do that. I don't want Villa Park to have to do that. I'd like you to pay attention to it now and take care of it and help fund it incrementally, so perhaps we can catch up at some point and maintain it for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
comments.
Actually, we had a similar issue here in Villa Park where we neglected our sanitary sewers for a number of years. And if we all look at our annual property tax assessment, we'll see a $300 per parcel assessment where we're catching up on paying for trying to rehabilitate our sanitary sewer system. And you're right, that's something we want to avoid with our streets. But thank you for coming in and your comments. I'd like everybody to recognize the Cabreras. They've shown a lot of leadership on the Infrastructure Management Advisory Committee. They have their own business where they provide expert engineering and support to other cities in very similar things. And I really appreciate you contributing your time to the city of Villa Park to help us better maintain our infrastructure. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Council members, do you have any other additional comments? Staff?
Members, do you have any other additional comments?
Hey, Steve,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I appreciate the young lady that just spoke a minute ago, but I wanted to find out, did we ever get from this committee a formal recommendation of what we need to do with the infrastructure? I mean, I hear spend more money, spend more money, spend more money, but is there a formal recommendation from the infrastructure committee on what we should do? And I'm speaking to the mayor's comment earlier about a plan. I'm not sure I've seen a plan other than what our city engineer has put together and recommendations that you and the staff have put together and done a really good job to help us with our expenditures.
To address the Mayor Pro Tem's comments, the comment that I was mentioning, and I'll give you a minute here. The plan that I'm referring to is a plan to spend money on the Wanda Greenbelt. I want to hear a plan, a cohesive plan with an ad hoc committee made up of members of the community, not the council, but the community, who may be architects, landscape architects, landscape contractors, master gardeners, or Mr. and Mrs. Jones that live on whatever street, but have lived there a long time and may have some historical ideas along the lines of deference to our citrus and historical background, but a plan. Spending money is not just the answer. We need to have a plan where it's going to go. And sure, fixing valves is expensive and sprinkler heads, but if we're going to do it, let's make sure we do it right the first time. Mrs. Cabrera, excuse me.
Thank you. I wanted to address Councilman's comments about the plans to, or I guess recommendations to come out of Infrastructure Committee. And it's true that we've spent the year kind of catching up. It's a lot of information to digest, a lot of budgeting and projects to go through, both for sewer and for roads and for storm drain. So we have spent this past year digesting all of that information, and actually, as a part of our last meeting, we are scheduled to bring to the advisory committee this next meeting in a couple weeks or a week away, a list of proposed recommendations to help the city better implement the infrastructure plan. So what we're hoping to have at least a draft form of that at this next meeting, input from the committee members. And once it's discussed and finalized, we hope to have that report ready, hopefully by the time the budget is ready, if not before.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
comments.
Can I
Thank-
make one other comment
Please.
too? I just wanted to say that I would be pleased to serve on an ad hoc committee for the Wanda Greenbelt as well. I personally loved the plan that was put forward before. I was actually crucified at that public hearing by all the residents that were in attendance. But I love the idea, but I know that there's a lot of money involved. And I know that there's also a lot of funding out there that's available that maybe we could pursue to convert this green grass thing into something that's more efficient from a water perspective. So, and maybe, the worst thing, when my child was small, the worst thing I could envision is taking her to play at the public parking lot that serves the Ralph. That didn't really seem like a great community area to get together. So she's all grown up now, so probably wouldn't be that involved, and we don't have a dog. But I would envision this area as, it's the only space in Villa Park that we can do something on a community level. So maybe with, joining private and a little help from public, we can do something. But there's a lot of engineering issues, and because Bob knows, or Mr. Councilman Collicott knows that it's a former railroad right-of-way. I know from Brea's experience that we have to be careful about the soil conditions and the arsenic and whether we're going to get sucked into some environmental EIR thing that's going to cost a lot of money. We don't want to go down the same road that Brea did, converting the tracks to their beautiful bike trail and a passive park. So we have to be cautious, we have to be educated, but I think you're right. Infrastructure is not just roads and streets and undergrounds, that it's what people can appreciate too. And being the last area in Villa Park that's even available, unless somebody wants to buy a parcel and donate it to the city as a park, we don't have that much to work with, and I would love to be involved in that ad hoc committee if it gets developed.
Sounds like we found our first
Thank you.
volunteer. Thank you. Very nice comments.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that. That's it.
Okay, our next meeting is June 4th at 6 PM for the second budget. We'll take the input and come back with some more specific recommendations.
Thank you.
Steve?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, one other comment. I would hope that if the infrastructure committee is going to put something together to come back to you with recommendations for the council, that included in that is a budget in terms of what they think it's going to cost us to do whatever they're recommending. And then I hope that we'll be prudent over time and not ask for an assessment of our city to pay for this through taxes or other whatever programs that might come up, but we'll pay for it through grants or our existing budget, and not some tax that we're going to put on people as a result of it. So I hope that we'll see a plan, a budget, and a recommendation on how we pay for it over time, and be prudent with it, and not do something that would cause us to go to the public for an assessment.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we adjourn?
We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you for everyone. Appreciate everybody's suggestions and comments.
I think this was
It was
confusing to me.
missing in the last one.